Humans are banned from alien temples. But this one's arrival changed history. The towering obsidian gates of the Xenoverse temple pulsed with ancient energy, intricate golden etchings shifting like liquid light. Ethan Cole stood before them, heart pounding, fully aware that he was somewhere no human had ever set foot. The temple was sacred, forbidden to outsiders, and protected by an order of Xenoverse sentinels sworn to keep its secrets buried forever. Yet, here he was, a human standing at the threshold of history, and he had no idea why. Beside him, High Sentinel Kareth regarded him with the same expression one might give a particularly stubborn pest. The Xenoverse warrior was taller, his crimson eyes glowing with irritation, his armor a perfect blend of ceremonial elegance and deadly efficiency. Ethan had lost count of how many times the alien had nearly drawn his blade on him in the past few days, and frankly, he was surprised they had even made it this far. "Let me get this straight," Ethan muttered, glancing up at the looming temple doors. "Your people have spent centuries keeping humans out of this place, and now you're personally escorting me inside?" Kareth's voice was clipped and tight. "Do not mistake this for an honor, human. The elders decreed your presence necessary. Nothing more." Ethan smirked, folding his arms. "Still sounds like progress to me." Kareth's hand twitched near the hilt of his blade. "You will regret this arrogance." The Xenoverse pressed his palm against the golden seal carved into the gate. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a vibration that seemed to sink into Ethan's bones. Slowly, the temple doors groaned and began to part, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Ethan exhaled as he took his first step forward, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. Every instinct screamed that he was walking into something far bigger than himself. The temple interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. Golden archways stretched impossibly high, swirling with symbols that shifted and pulsed as though alive. Enormous statues of Xenoverse gods and warriors lined the corridors, their gemstone eyes gleaming with judgment. The air was thick, charged with something ancient and watching. Ethan had explored plenty of alien ruins before, but nothing like this. This place was still alive. "What do I feel like I'm being sized up?" he muttered. Kareth barely spared him a glance. "Because you are. Great." Trespassing into holy territory was one thing, but now he was being evaluated by something he couldn't even see. That never ended well. They reached a vast circular chamber at the heart of the temple. Ethan immediately felt a shift, a pressure like unseen eyes locking onto him. The room was filled with high-ranking Xenoverse figures, their robes shimmering with the sacred glyphs of their order. At the center of the chamber stood an elevated dais, pulsing with a light so bright it almost hurt to look at. Kareth gestured toward it without a word. Ethan hesitated. "You sure this isn't some kind of sacrificial altar?" Kareth's expression didn't change. "Step forward." Something about this felt wrong. Every fiber of his being told him that once he stepped onto that platform, there would be no turning back. But he wasn't about to back down now. With a deep breath, he moved forward, placing one foot onto the glowing dais. The moment his foot touched the platform, the temple rumbled. Light erupted from the walls, cascading down in waves, illuminating carvings that had been dormant for centuries. Symbols flared to life, golden inscriptions twisting and reshaping as if reacting to his presence. Then, a sound unlike anything he had ever heard filled the chamber. A voice layered with 1,000 echoes, reverberating through the stone itself. "Atlas human stands before us." Ethan's blood ran cold. The Xenoverse around him immediately fell to their knees in reverence. Kareth bowed low, pressing his forehead to the ground. Ethan, he just stood there, eyes locked onto the shifting light that was no longer just light. A figure was forming within it. Something not quite solid, not quite energy, something older than time itself. A presence that felt impossibly vast, impossibly knowing. A voice, ancient and absolute, rumbled through the chamber once more. "You should not exist." Ethan's stomach tightened. That was definitely not what he had been expecting. He opened his mouth, trying to form some kind of response, but before he could speak, the chamber shook violently. Across the far wall, a massive inscription flared to life. One that had been hidden in the darkness, untouched for millennia. An ancient prophecy, glowing with brilliant, undeniable clarity. And in the center of it, unmistakable and clear as day, a depiction of a human. Him. The golden inscription blazed across the temple wall, pulsing like a living thing. Ethan stood frozen, heart hammering as his own likeness stared back at him, carved into the sacred stone of an alien civilization he had never known existed until now. Every detail was there. His stance, his silhouette, even the cut of his jacket, perfectly replicated as if the sculptor had seen him with their own eyes. The temple chamber trembled again, as though the structure itself was reacting to his presence. The towering energy figure before him, the entity that had spoken with the weight of millennia, loomed closer, its form flickering between solidity and formless light. Its voice carried the force of an ancient storm. "You do not belong." Ethan swallowed hard. "Well, I get that a lot." Kareth's head snapped up, eyes burning with fury. "Silence. Human." He turned back to the glowing presence and pressed a fist to his chest in reverence. "Great elders, we do not understand this. He was brought here by your decree. How can he be both forbidden and foretold?" The figure's radiance dimmed slightly, the temple's energy humming like an unsettled beast. "The prophecy speaks of one who walks outside the known path, a being not written into the celestial design." Ethan blinked. "Yeah, I'm gonna need you to dumb that down a little." The temple shook again. The carvings on the wall shifted, reshaping themselves as if reacting to his words. The image of his figure split apart, reforming into something new. Two paths stretched before it, one leading toward a rising sun, the other into an abyss. The elder's voice grew softer, almost contemplative. "Your presence disrupts the balance. A choice stands before you, one that was never meant to exist." Ethan turned to Kareth, who was still kneeling, his expression unreadable. "Okay, great. So I'm some kind of cosmic clerical error. But what exactly am I choosing between?" Kareth's jaw tightened. "This temple is a sacred archive of the Xenoverse's greatest secrets. If the elders have foreseen a human here, it means you are tied to its fate in ways we do not yet comprehend. If you are meant to bring destruction," he hesitated, "we must act accordingly." Ethan caught the implication immediately. "You mean kill me?" Kareth did not deny. The golden glyphs along the walls suddenly pulsed faster, shifting again. A new image formed. A great war, fleets colliding in the stars. Xenoverse cities burning under an unknown assault. In the midst of the devastations stood the same human figure, arms raised, wielding something Ethan couldn't quite understand. A weapon, a beacon. The elder's voice resonated again. "You are the fulcrum upon which fate turns, a force unseen. If you remain, the course of history will be rewritten." Ethan exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. No pressure or anything. Kareth rose to his feet at last, his expression caught between suspicion and reluctant acceptance. "Then we must determine which path he follows." He turned to Ethan, his gaze like a blade. "And whether he should be allowed to follow it at all." Ethan smirked, despite the tension crackling in the air. Not really feeling the warm welcome here. "Guys." The temple's light surged suddenly, the energy in the room pressing against his skin. The elder raised a hand, if it could even be called a hand, toward him. "Step forward, Outlander." Ethan hesitated, every nerve in his body telling him that whatever was about to happen next would change his life forever. And yet, something deep inside whispered that this moment had already been waiting for him. He took a step forward. As Ethan stepped forward, the temple seemed to breathe around him. The walls shimmered, the air thickened, and the energy pressing against his skin intensified, like an invisible tide pulling him deeper into the unknown. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but something beyond logic, urged him forward. The elder's radiant form hovered closer, its glow pulsating like a heartbeat. The glyphs around the chamber shifted again, twisting into new patterns as if rewriting themselves in real time. The prophecy was changing, responding to his mere presence. Kareth remained rigid beside him, one hand resting near his blade. He wasn't about to let Ethan out of his sight. Whatever happened next, the Xenoverse warrior would ensure he had full control over the outcome. Ethan exhaled slowly. "So, what exactly are we doing here? Cosmic interrogation? A trial? Maybe, yeah." The air cracked like thunder. A force unlike anything he had ever felt tore through him. White, hot energy piercing through his skull, his chest, his bones. It wasn't pain. It was knowledge flooding into him so fast it was impossible to grasp. Images, voices, entire histories compressed into raw sensation. For a split second, he wasn't Ethan anymore. He was standing on an ancient battlefield, sword in hand, his body not human. He felt the weight of wars that had been fought long before Earth's first fire was lit. He saw worlds burning, the screams of civilizations lost, the rise and fall of empires buried beneath the sands of time. Then, just as suddenly, he was himself again. His body staggered backward, breath ragged, heart pounding like a war drum. His hands shook, his skin tingling with an energy that hadn't been there before. Kareth grabbed him by the collar and hauled him upright. "What did you see?" Ethan's voice came out hoarse. I don't know." He swallowed, his pulse still racing. "But it felt like I was." He stopped, unsure if saying it aloud would make it real. Kareth's eyes narrowed. "You were reliving the past." The elder's form pulsed again, its voice layered with something unreadable. Not the past. The echo of what has always been. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Yeah. And what does that mean?" Silence. Then the chamber's inscriptions shifted once more. This time, the image that formed wasn't of war. It was of Ethan himself. But he wasn't alone. He was standing beside a Selvoran, their figures locked in an unspoken alliance. In the next carving, they were leading an army together, a fleet of ships rising behind them. And in the final image, a new throne, one unlike any of the others. A throne made for two. Ethan's breath hitched. He wasn't just some anomaly. He was meant to be here. Kareth's fingers tightened on his collar. "Tell me why your face is written in our sacred halls." "Human." Ethan let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Trust me, buddy. I'd really love to know that myself." But deep down, something stirred inside him. Something ancient. Something waiting. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he was the one making history, or if history had been waiting for him all along. The weight of the prophecy settled over Ethan, like a mountain pressing against his chest. The images carved into the temple walls were not predictions. They were declarations, written in stone long before he was born. His mind reeled, struggling to process the impossible truth. He wasn't just an anomaly in the Selvoran archives. He was part of their destiny. Kareth's grip on his collar remained firm, his crimson eyes burning with barely restrained fury. The warrior had spent his entire life upholding his people's traditions, defending the sanctity of their temples. And now, in the span of a single moment, all of it had been shattered. "You will explain this," Kareth growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Or I will carve the answers from you myself." Ethan let out a breathless laugh, still lightheaded from whatever had just happened. "Yeah, sure, buddy. Let me just dig through the centuries of alien memories that just got dumped into my brain and get back to you." The temple rumbled again, as if growing impatient with their ignorance. The elder's form flared brighter, waves of golden energy cascading across the room, pushing Kareth back and forcing Ethan to his knees. "The path is chosen," the elder intoned. "It has always been chosen." Ethan clenched his jaw. What path? Chosen by who? The symbols around them shifted, carving a final image into the walls. Two figures, one human and one Selvoran, standing at the gates of the temple, their hands clasped in unity. And before them, an entire galaxy, bending to their will. Kareth's expression hardened as he took it in. His people had spent thousands of years believing that no outsider would ever be worthy of entering their sacred halls, let alone standing beside them in a position of power. And yet, this prophecy, his own history, was telling him otherwise. "No," he growled. "This cannot be." Ethan ran a hand over his face. "Yeah. You and me both, Paul." Kareth's frustration boiled over. In a blur of motion, he drew his blade and pointed it directly at Ethan's throat. "If this is true, then prove it," he hissed. "If you are part of our fate, show me why you deserve it." Ethan swallowed. "All right. You want to do this now? Fine." The temple's light surged, locking them both within its ancient gaze. This wasn't just a fight for answers anymore. It was a battle for the future itself. The temple chamber crackled with energy, golden light surging between the shifting glyphs as Ethan and Kareth stood locked in place. The Selvoran warrior's blade was mere inches from Ethan's throat, his grip steady, his crimson eyes burning with challenge. This wasn't just a fight. This was a test demanded by tradition, by fate itself. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears, but he refused to look away. He wasn't here to die. He was here to understand. "All right." Ethan exhaled, his voice even. Let's say I am part of this prophecy. Let's say I was meant to be here. That doesn't mean I'm just going to roll over and let destiny decide my next move. Karith didn't move, his muscles coiled like a predator's, but there was the faintest flicker of hesitation in his gaze. Ethan took the opening. With a sharp twist of his body, he dodged the blade, letting it slice harmlessly through the air beside him. His hand shot out, grabbing Karith's wrist and locking them in a struggle of brute force. Karith was stronger, that was a given. But Ethan was faster, and more importantly, he had spent years fighting opponents who underestimated him. Karith snarled, wrenching free and lunging forward, his blade swinging in a deadly arc. Ethan ducked, spinning beneath the attack and slamming his fist into the Selvoran's ribs. The alien barely flinched, but Ethan wasn't done. Using his opponent's forward momentum, he pivoted, hooking his foot behind Karith's knee and driving him to the ground. For the first time, the Sentinel looked surprised. Ethan, now towering over him, placed his foot on the warrior's weapon, pinning it to the floor. He had won, but Karith was already moving again. The Selvoran warrior lashed out, grabbing Ethan's wrist and flipping him off balance. They crashed into the temple floor, dust and golden light swirling around them. Neither held the advantage. Neither was willing to give in. Then, the elder spoke again. Enough? The temple shook as if the voice itself had pressed down upon it, a force of pure will silencing them both. Karith and Ethan froze, locked in their struggle, until Karith finally released his grip. Ethan pulled back, breathing heavily. That was exhausting. Karith slowly sat up, eyes narrowing as he studied Ethan. Really studied him for the first time. There was no longer pure disdain in his expression. No longer unquestioning defiance. There was understanding. The elder's light danced across the carvings, and the temple shifted one final time. The ancient prophecy rewrote itself, solidifying into a single, unchangeable truth. The human and the Selvoran standing not as enemies, but as brothers in arms. Karith looked at the image, then back at Ethan. His hand hovered over his weapon, but instead of drawing it, he reached up and pressed his fist to his chest. A warrior's salute. "You are not what I expected," Karith muttered, almost reluctantly. Ethan let out a breathless chuckle. "Yeah, well, welcome to the club." The elder's voice resonated one last time. History has changed. The walls dimmed, the prophecy now set in stone. Ethan wasn't just some outsider trespassing in a holy place. He was part of it now. Whether he was ready or not, the future of two species now rested in his hands.